Welcome to the Fandome, where challenges fuel our passion, and god, this is a challenge, Tom. Today we delve into the intriguing world of House of the Dragon and retell the tale from the often less supported perspective, exploring the deeds of the Greens and their quest for the throne. We'll be following the events through the eyes of a fictional character close to Alicent Hightower, exploring the nature of misinterpretation and pragmatic moral justification to provide us with, hopefully, some insight into why the Greens are not without cause in their endeavours to claim the throne. Oh, and fear not, we'll only be basing this off the first season of House of the Dragon, so don't worry about book spoilers. Now, we know after hearing this, many of you will furiously type into your keyboard, WTF, this is biased AF, and to that we say, gold star, you got the point of the video. Since the Dance of the Dragons seems to be a way more one-sided debate than the conflicts found in Game of Thrones, with some people supporting the Baratheons, some supporting the Lannisters, the Starks, the Tyrells, and so forth. And I agreed with him that it was a pretty interesting idea, even if I am on the other side of the fence. So Tom knocked up a script and I added my tidbits, and hopefully, since this is two writers smashing their ideas together, we still have something that's coherent. So when you listen to it, do understand that yes, we've exaggerated some actions or read into details a little bit too much, but it's all in service of putting you into the Greens' perspective and how they might frame the conflict if they were told to retell it. So with that, kick back, sip on your favorite brew, prepare your arguments, and just immerse yourself.
It is only right that we begin this tale with Lady Alicent. From the beginning, she serves less as daughter and more as chess piece to Otto Hightower. A pawn to begin with, though we all know what transpires when such a piece reaches the other side of the board intact. Alicent was to slide into the void left by the tragic death of Rhaenyra, queen and wife of King Viserys, taken before her time in the battlegrounds of childbirth. This tragedy was not to be without company, for the newborn Prince Balon, Viserys' sole male heir and the sole bright spot to be gleamed from the Queen's death, was also not long waiting for the embrace of the Seven. This left the king at this time with no male heirs through parentage, and in grief-fueled rage, he disinherited the only viable substitute, Daemon Targaryen, his brother, for the utterance of a truly abhorrent remark about the short-lived Prince Balon.
The heir for a day.
Daemon was cast aside, and Viserys instead raised his daughter Rhaenyra to the position of heir to the throne. A bold and unusual move, it must be said, one that goes against what is expected, and antithesis to the very customs as to why Viserys is currently king. Disinheriting Daemon was not without justification at the time, especially considering his dispensing of his own uncivilized brand of justice in King's Landing, acting as judge, jury, and executioner. No one wants another King Maegor to inherit the throne. He was known as the Cruel for a reason. No, a realm under Daemon would be anarchy, and while Rhaenyra is a more worthy monarch, she is the last in Viserys' line, and not immune to illness or assassin's blades. Things all too common in a realm like Westeros. A king should not be without a wife, one who can produce multiple heirs to strengthen the line and inherit the throne. Too many times have eggs been put into one basket, only to be crushed. Viserys was without wife. It was prudent to find suitors. The Velaryons, the other surviving bloodline of old Valyria, offered up their 12-year-old daughter, Rhaenyra, whilst Otto offered his daughter Alicent, who was 15 years of age at the time. Rhaenyra brought with her the power of her house, the most politically wise choice by far. Alicent's house also commanded respectable power, but ultimately her greatest strength was the pleasure of her company. Alicent was a much better fit for the king, especially considering their bond as seen in their many meetings, and it was the king's choice who he chose to wed. He marries for the idea of love over power, an honorable choice. Over the next 3 years, Alicent would carry out her duty, bearing Viserys a son, Aegon II, and a daughter, Helena, further joined by 2 younger brothers. With Aegon's birth, it was only natural the question of his ascension to heir would come about, and was expected to take place on his 3rd birthday. After all, this is the way of things. It's been this way for decades, if not centuries, before even the arrival of the Targaryens. It was the right of males of the family line to inherit the position of their ancestors. A position only strengthened by Rhaenyra's lack of interest and failure of duty to the immense honor she had been bestowed. Since being named heir, Rhaenyra had done a poor job fulfilling her role, often keeping to herself and avoiding interaction with influential members of the other great houses, preferring to in fact read books under a tree accompanied by a singer. This was unbefitting an heir to the throne. As heir, it's crucial to establish bonds with the houses you will rule over and become acquainted with your subjects. A distant person is destined to be a lonely one. A leader without followers behind them is leading nothing. Public outbursts and childish spats with her father, the most damaging of which occurring on Aegon's birthday, coupled with the way she bristled at performing her duties, did not inspire hope in those that would see the realm remain secure. It was left to Otto to be the voice of reason, to calm both the king and his daughter in the presence of the other houses. In private, Viserys reiterated why he disinherited Daemon.
I named her to protect the realm from Daemon. I named her Heart of Love because I no longer believed.
But also his newfound revelation that naming Rhaenyra heir to the throne might have been a mistake. Viserys would go on to explain to Alicent his experiencing a dream that he would bear Aegon a son, who would bear Aegon's crown, that he'd tried multiple times to recapture the dream, but couldn't, blaming his obsession for causing the death of his first wife, and how it had played a part in his reasoning to appoint Rhaenyra as a way to set things right. But maybe he'd made an error in his decision. Otto disclosed how excited the other houses were at the prospect of Aegon being king, and how Rhaenyra overstepping Aegon would tear the realm apart. The realm wanted a man on the throne, not a woman. A good king listens to the will of the people, and respects the laws of gods and men. A good king also backs his vassals when conflict befalls them, self-inflicted or not, as it had done to Daemon and the Velaryons in their struggle against the Triarchy. It was in fact due mainly in part to Alicent's eloquent advice that Viserys was willing to cast aside his disputes with Daemon and the Velaryons and send aid, despite their thirst for senseless war.
Is it better for the realm if the crab feeder thrives, or is vanquished?
It was also on Alicent's elegant voice of reason, against even her own father's wishes, that Viserys force a union with Aegon, that the king instead allow Rhaenyra to try and find her own match, and without explicitly stating it, ascend the throne. Alicent had tried hard to put her estranged friend Rhaenyra ahead of herself, her own children, and the realm. Believing in the value of loyalty, she continually tried to repair the breach between herself and Rhaenyra. Rhaenyra, however, continued with her selfish tirades, spouting directionless nonsense about how she wished to be something more than a body that pushes out heirs, but not defining what purpose she could serve given her position. An insensitive comment at best. Giving birth to heirs of the realm is a great honor, and Rhaenyra was afforded the option of picking her partner, a privilege many other women in Westeros are denied, regardless of ambition. If your blood is royal, continuing the line is of utmost importance, regardless of if you are a man or a woman. Rhaenyra would instead choose a far more sordid path to adulthood. One pivotal night, the Hand of the King is informed of Rhaenyra's transgressions with her uncle Daemon, in a whorehouse of all places. Otto, with heavy heart, informs Viserys of this debauchery in private, In effort to avoid the embarrassment this would bring upon Viserys in front of his small council. Viserys didn't take it well. Despite the servants' claims of Rhaenyra returning to the castle at late hour, instead of blindly placing faith in her father's words, Alicent instead approached Rhaenyra in person to question her old friend about these worrying accusations. And the trusting queen takes the princess's word for it, for her value in loyalty between them remains unshaken. Alicent would proceed to vouch for her friend's virtue to the king, explaining that while maybe they can't trust Daemon's word on the matter, as he often lies, it is not in Rhaenyra's nature to be deceitful. Daemon is once again banished from King's Landing, and good riddance. With Alicent taking Rhaenyra's side, Otto is also removed as Hand of the King in consequence. Dark days are soon to follow, when those with melodies of wisdom are silenced, allowing those with cunning to sing songs of deceit freely. With a recent victory over the Triarchy, the Velaryons became emboldened and sought marriage for Rhaenyra, who was now 15 years old herself. By potentially marrying Rhaenyra to a nobleman in Braavos, the Velaryons would gain a significant amount of control over the trade routes to Westeros. The Velaryons already possessed one of, if not the biggest navies in the realm, were certainly the richest house due to the precious trade routes they ran. This placed them in a position of great power, with an almost strangle-like influence over the king, and in return, the realm. In an attempt to restore bonds and strengthen the house, Viserys goes to Driftmark, with his daughter in tow, to propose a marriage between Rhaenyra and the Velaryons' eldest son and heir, Rhaenor. During these events, Alicent sees her father off. They quarrel, with Alicent putting forth that had Otto relented on pushing Aegon for the throne, that perhaps his removal of authority might not have taken place. Otto would go on to warn Alicent of the need to protect herself.
The realm will not accept her, and to secure her claim, she'll have to put your children to the sword. She'll have no choice.
He is still her father, despite his cold purposing of her. A man cursed with the ability to see what will likely happen if Rhaenyra ascends the throne, with realm-swallowing unrest likely to follow. He's cruelly, seemingly unable to fix it. Whilst pondering in the gardens, Alicent received worrying news from a new friend in Larry Strong, who spoke of the injustice done to Otto, and that perhaps Rhaenyra's recent illness has placed her reliability into question. Alicent would further investigate by questioning Sir Criston Cole, Kingsguard and sworn shield of the princess, on Rhaenyra's whereabouts that fateful night, where accusations of misconduct had echoed throughout the keep, only to receive a stunning admission from the knight.
I have committed it. At her instigation, it is true, but it is no excuse.
In an act of mercy, she lets the knight go, refusing to allow Rhaenyra's recklessness to ruin any more lives. She sees the princess in a new light, and decides she will allow her old friend's lies to blind her vision no more. At the great feast in honor of Rhaenyra's betrothal to Rhaenor, Alicent arrives late in a striking green dress, a clear statement to those who know what color the Old Town beacon burns when House Hightower goes to war. Alicent stands tall to honor her father and her heritage in his absence. During the feast and Daemon's rude interruption, his unsuitability is only made more evident when accusations arise from the anointed knight Sir Gerald Royce that he was potentially involved with the death of Rhys Royce, Gerald's cousin and Daemon's wife by law. The prince is cursed with death and brings dark clouds wherever he goes, as yet another tragedy would strike during the feast as Sir Criston slays Joffrey, the Knight of Kisses, during an altercation. A man of faith might have seen this as a bad omen on the union of Rhaenyra and Rhaenor. Alicent later found Sir Criston near the keep's weirwood tree and prevented his committing honor-bound suicide. She reasoned enough blood had been spilled that night, and for all his faults, he was a good man, an honest knight, and Alicent felt surely he would have good cause for his actions. There was no need for pointless death when a knight may still serve the realm. Another act of benevolence from the good queen, who above all else values duty, honor, and loyalty. A decade passes and Rhaenyra's third son Joffrey is born. Eager to see her new grandson, Alicent, along with an eager King Viserys, requests that he be brought to her chambers. Unfortunately, Joffrey didn't bear the traditional silver hair that both House Targaryen and Velaryon are famous for, putting his heritage into dispute, with suspicions only further heightened when looking at his older dark-haired brothers Lucerys and Jacaerys, and contrasted with children born of Daemon and Laena's union. Alicent brought these doubts to Viserys, who continued to play the fool in favor of protecting his daughter.
To have one child like that is a mistake. To have 3 is an insult. To the throne, to you, to House Velaryon and the match you battled so hard to make for her, not to mention decency itself. Have I lost my sanity, Sir Criston? Do my senses lead me astray, or is everyone else asleep, dreaming the same woolly dream?
Sometimes seems so, Your Grace.
However, Alicent still expects those around her to act with honor and decency above all. Virtue she tries to instill in her children to the best of her ability. During training in the Dragon Pits, her second son, Aemond, had almost lost his life after sneaking into the caves for a closer look at a dragon. His motivations were the consequence of his being bullied by Rhaenyra's 2 sons, who would mock him for not possessing a dragon of his own. To rub salt to the wounds, Lucerys would give Aemond a pig, inaptly named the Pink Dread. A most deep insult Aemond would remember and carry with him to adulthood. This bullying would continue through Aemond's formative years, later resulting in dispute at Viserys' Last Supper. At a later council meeting, Rhaenyra proposed a matching of Alicent's daughter Helaena and Rhaenyra's eldest son Jacaerys. This is seen as a great affront to the honorable queen. Rhaenyra might have been able to fool the king, but she cannot fool the queen, who saw through the superficial offers of uniting their houses and the bribery of a dragon's egg, all to make the bitter medicine easier to swallow. Rhaenyra's sons are bastards, and it is not implausible that this would be brought to relevance someday. At this point it is already the gossip of the castle, and Sir Harwin Strong, who many suspect to be the boy's true father, disgraces himself, attacking Sir Criston Cole in the courtyard, and causing suspicions to continue mounting even further. Sir Lionel, knowing the truth of the Queen's children, tries to resign his position, but the king refuses. Viserys simply wouldn't see reason, and is again blind to Rhaenyra's transgressions. Thankfully, Rhaenyra takes this moment to reflect, and removes herself and her family from court to the island of Dragonstone. Later speaking in confidence to Larry Strong, Alicent confesses her wish of having her father back in court to help restore reason to the madness that was unfolding. For too long she'd had the cards stacked against her. It was time to right the wrong done to Otto. Unfortunately, Larys acts on impulse in trying to please the queen, having his father and brother killed. And Alicent, horrified to her core, unsure of how to act, tries to distance herself from the new Lord of Harrenhal. An evil act is always dark in color, whether placed in the light or not. A good queen knows this. Meanwhile, Daemon once again sees a spouse pass from this world, though this time the circumstances are far less suspicious, though no less brutal, as the wonderful Lady Laena passes during childbirth. During the funeral of Rhaenyra Targaryen at Driftmark, Alicent's long-term bullied son Aemond was finally able to achieve his dream and claim the dragon Vhagar, though as we know, dreams can swiftly morph into nightmares. Upon his return to the castle, Aemond is viciously attacked in the caves under Driftmark by his nephews Jacaerys and Lucerys, alongside his cousins and daughters of Daemon, Baela and Rhaenyra. Heavily outnumbered, Aemond was bravely able to gain the upper hand, before Lucerys viciously sliced at Aemond's face in a dishonorable unsheathing of steel, causing the young prince to lose an eye and bear a hideous scar for the rest of his life. What justice is dispensed for such a vicious attack on the prince, you ask? None. The king once more refused to pass punishment on the vicious Lucerys and Jacaerys. Rhaenyra opportunistically uses the moment to deflect suspicions and gain further protection by turning this onto poor Aemond, requesting from whom he had heard the rumors of Lucerys and Jacaerys being bastards. Knowing no shame, Rhaenyra escalated the situation further and suggested he be questioned sharply. A most polite way of recommending torture. A monstrous request, even before considering the boy had just lost an eye, his wound freshly sewn up by the Maester mere moments before. Rhaenyra's hypocrisy rings throughout the chamber, covering her lies and her son's bastard heritage by marking Aemond and anyone who questions the legitimacy of Rhaenyra's sons as liars and treasonous traitors. Eventually, the king questions Aegon, who speaks the truth of where he heard the rumors concerning the legitimacy of Rhaenyra's sons. Refusing to accept this, Viserys states boldly that any more talk on the legitimacy of these children will be met with the removal of tongues. Outraged at the injustice, Alicent, in a justifiable moment of madness, sought to claim the eye of Lucerys Velaryon herself, a feeling any parent would share. If your child was mercilessly bullied, you try to defend them. This goes beyond name-calling, as poor Aemond has been permanently disfigured and will have hampered sight for the rest of his life. For what? Speaking the truth? Acknowledging an open secret? The sins of Viserys' blindness were cruelly passed on to his son. Injustice had prevailed, and Alicent needed righteous retribution in order to even the scales. Confronted by Rhaenyra, she gives the lying princess a scar of her own to wear, and should consider herself lucky it was one she could hide away from the world, a courtesy not extended to Aemond. With the King's Court deciding to return home to King's Landing, dark clouds still loomed over Driftmark as the good knight Rhaenyra Targaryen, husband of Rhaenyra, was attacked and killed in his father's halls. The assassin evaded capture, though rumors suggest it was Sir Carl. Whatever madness beset him to murder Rhaenyra was left unknown. All we do know is that Rhaenyra was quick to remarry within days, to none other than her uncle Daemon. The wedding would draw many questions. At the forefront of these, the idea that perhaps Rhaenyra had her good husband killed in order to marry her uncle. Dark clouds and mysterious deaths continue to follow that prince. 6 more years pass, and in Rhaenyra's absence, Alicent and Otto Hightower have been overseeing the realm in the king's stead, due to his continuing poor health. They alone carry the burden of ruling, because Rhaenyra desired to keep herself at Dragonstone and to ignore her duties to the realm. Only when Lucerys' claim to Driftmark is questioned by Vaemond Velaryon does Rhaenyra return once more. Her first port of call is to visit her father and cause him further stress. An unkind act when one's health is so poor and the end draws so very near. Unfortunately for our pious Queen Alicent, the past 6 years have shown her son Aegon to be a rather ignoble prince, with rumors spreading around the castle of the prince's attention to servants. Alicent employs kindness over brutality with the servant, offering her a bag of gold, enough to hopefully start a new life, and moon tea to cleanse her body of the unfortunate situation. Alicent goes one step further than Viserys ever did with his own daughter, and scolds and disowns her son. His actions were those unbefitting of a future king, and more importantly, a son of hers.
You are no son of mine.
Alicent would not repeat the mistakes of Viserys and allow the unsavory actions of her children to go unpunished. Having dealt with her son, Alicent meets with Rhaenyra and Daemon, who rudely question the care given to the king.
King Viserys' condition has worsened since you saw him last. It subjects him to considerable pain on the advice of the Maesters.
The Maesters, of course. It is they who keep him addled on milk of the poppy while the Hightowers warm his throne.
Rhaenyra, if you would see him without it.
Who were they to question our pious queen? Where have they been? They've abandoned the king for 6 years and expect to swan in to a grand reception? Always about them and their needs. More pressing, though, is the matter of Driftmark and the Velaryon succession. The court gathered within the throne room. Aemond Velaryon puts forth his case of justified entitlement, and Otto hears him out, despite Rhaenyra's attempts to make a mockery of the proceedings, throwing out accusations of bias. As it comes to Rhaenyra's time to speak, the gravely ill king enters, to take charge and settle matters, as is his right as king. Through noticeable anguish and commendable will, the good king seats himself on the Iron Throne for what we would later know to be the final time. To pass a noble decree, to ensure justice prevails, to unite the realm, all things a good and just king would strive for during their final moments of absolute authority. Viserys was no different. A pity his final attempts to defend his daughter and her brood had unknowingly ensured chaos in the realm, which can be the only result when lies and deceit are allowed to prevail, with a shield of nobility and decency to protect them. Aemond Velaryon, incensed by this injustice, continues his case and throws unkind words at the princess. Unkind, but laced with truths the court all know to be right, but have been subject to inaction.
And she is a whore.
Before the king can carry out punishment on Vaemond, Daemon, knowingly in defense of deceit, rather cheaply it must be said, beheads the man from behind. A stark reminder that there is only one truth in this room. Their truth. Later that night, Viserys held a supper for the family, and Alicent, for one final time, tried to make peace with Rhaenyra. For her sake, her family's sake, and her king's sake.
You will make a fine queen.
For both herself and the king, it was time to bury the hatchet, and considering Aegon's transgressions, she could hardly justify placing him on the throne over Rhaenyra. That would be hypocritical at best. Sadly, during said supper, Aemond is mocked for his scar and deformity by Lucerys, who can barely control his own laughter at the pettiest of insinuations. Understandably aggravated by this, Aemond returns fire, despite Alicent trying to keep the peace. And what is the best way Aemond can return an insult from Lucerys? Why, to speak the truth.
Strong.
Aemond.
Come. Let us drain our cups. Strong boys.
I dare you to say that again.
Why?
The Velaryon boys could dish it out, but found they couldn't quite take it when they were on the other side of mockery. They tried to start a fight, which is quickly finished by Aemond and his brother. The sons of Rhaenyra would do well to learn from such a gallant young prince like Aemond, an image of knighthood. The prince would have made a fine heir and king. Despite this reprehensible behavior, the good Queen Alicent still tries to reconcile with Rhaenyra, showing genuine desire for Rhaenyra to return to King's Landing and spend time with herself and Viserys. To her credit, Rhaenyra accepts this olive branch, though it should be noted that the good Queen had been holding it out long before this, only for Rhaenyra to feign ignorance of its existence. In the late hours of that night, the ever-loyal Alicent tends to the king one final time. As she has done throughout all these years, through a decade and a half of illness, she remained to comfort him. It would be no different in his final moments. Viserys, in his last breaths, spoke of a dream, Aegon's dream. Aegon was the one to unite the realm against the cold and the dark. That Alicent must do this. And Alicent, as always, the dutiful wife and queen, resolved to place her son on the throne, and to guide him as best she could. It was Viserys' last wish, and the gods gave him strength to utter those words. With the passing of Viserys, it was of the utmost importance that Aegon was crowned immediately to ease the transition without bloodshed. Many great houses offered oaths of loyalty, and the largest crowd ever recorded in the history of Westeros flocked to the crowning of the young prince, who accepted the legendary crown of Aegon the Conqueror and held aloft the mighty sword Blackfire. It was the very image of Aegon's dream. The recently passed Viserys would have been proud to see that dream become a reality. The masses screamed with joy and adoration, all in support of their new king. Unfortunately, such jovial celebrations would not last. Tragedy struck as the traitorous Rhaenys Targaryen, upon the back of the monstrous Meleys, laid waste to the crowd, killing countless innocents on her path to kill the new king. Upon failing to do so by divine intervention from the gods, she flees, with last reports stating she had headed to Dragonstone. For what purpose? There can be only one purpose: swearing loyalty to Rhaenyra and her bastards. In a noble gesture, Aegon sent forth the hand of the king to treat with Rhaenyra, presenting offers to brush aside this misunderstanding between the two sides, providing she bent the knee. Of course, Daemon was present, and the civilities soon escalated to Daemon threatening the life of Otto Hightower with drawn sword. By the light of the Seven, cooler heads prevailed, and Rhaenyra promises an answer upon the morrow. Sadly, this was but a ruse. Rhaenyra sent her sons as emissaries in efforts to secure the loyalties of the various powerful houses of the kingdom. Sending boys to do a man's work is never a wise move at the best of times. Rhaenyra sent the young Lucerys to treat with the Baratheons at Storm's End, but all too late, for King Aegon had proven to be a wise king, predicting this move by his sister, and sending an emissary of his own to secure Storm's End, his gallant brother Prince Aemond. In a gesture of goodwill, Aemond tries to seek out the young prince on his journey back to Dragonstone, with one final offer of peace. As Aemond tries offering a hand, Lucerys instead offers Dragonfire. A foolish move, and sadly one Lucerys the Hot-Headed would pay for with his life, as Vhagar the Mighty, with no other option, defends herself against the brash prince and his unruly dragon to protect her rider. And from these sparks, the dance of the dragon ignites. A costly struggle is to follow. A struggle all too easily avoided had a selfish princess thought of the wants of the people and accepted her father's wishes that Aegon be king.